G7 leaders and heads of state from some of the world's richest nations sat down for a plenary session on the second day of the summit as President Cyril Ramaphosa and Moon Jae-in from South Korea, together with Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison and United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres are also part of that meeting. India's President Narendra Modi, also an invited guest, has joined the session remotely. Leaders from the United States, Japan, Germany, Britain, France, Italy and Canada are expected to discuss a plan to rebuild the world economy and adopt a health declaration, all aimed at planning better for future pandemics. For an update on the day's outcomes, we're now going to cross to our correspondent, Laura Makin-Isherwood. Laura, a very good evening on our end. Just looking at the day's events and outcomes that have unfolded, walk us through what we saw today. Of course, there was that declaration being discussed amongst other issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we saw this morning President Cyril Ramaphosa arriving at Carbis Bay, walking along those sands and meeting Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, who is the chair of this summit here in Cornwall and who invited South Africa to join because he sees the country as really important to sort of future trade partnerships. And also the country is obviously a developing economy, really growing in strength. They discussed, the leaders together, along with those guest nations, the future responses that these nations might take together in terms of pandemics. And we've seen that President Ramaphosa has tweeted just a short time ago saying he's welcomed the support of US President Joe Biden for a TRIPS waiver to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we are urging leaders at the G7 summit to support a time-bound and limited waiver to expand the global supply of COVID-19 vaccines and medicines. Now, of course, that TRIPS waiver is something that South Africa has been pushing for alongside India, lifting temporarily of intellectual property rights on vaccines to allow for them to be manufactured more easily, more quickly and more cheaply, essentially, in countries that currently don't have a lot of access to them. So if President Ramaphosa says that the US President Joe Biden has indeed supported that idea, then perhaps we could get an agreement on that by the end of this weekend.
Laura, we've seen some climate protests also taking place near the centre, of course, where the talks are being held. Any disruptions that they've caused? What's been happening on that front?
There's been a lot of people, as you say, out trying to make their voices heard, not just on climate, but on other issues, including the situation at the moment in Tigray. We've also seen a lot of people pushing the idea for more trade. In terms of the climate, though, we've seen people out on paddle boards today, out in the sea, trying to say that people need to, leaders need to come together to take greater action on climate change now. We've also seen Extinction Rebellion. Obviously, that's a group that is well known now around the world for causing a lot of disruption when it comes to protesting climate issues. But here so far there hasn't been that much disruption per se. There have been a few arrests of people trying to enter the area, we think, of that sort of G7 precinct, but in terms of disruption there's not been a lot of that. The meetings have continued as normal, and of course we've seen a number of bilaterals, not just yesterday but also today, and that's going to continue that agenda tonight.
Laura, on that note, what can we expect tomorrow?
Tomorrow is going to be all about climate. So while we've had those protests today, tomorrow is the big day for those discussions. There will be action in terms of thinking about green jobs, green prosperity, how nations can work together to tackle climate more effectively, I suppose. We also hear that there's going to be a video message from David Attenborough, the world-renowned videographer and journalist who has travelled the world across his whole lifetime documenting climate change and has recently become a real campaigner for trying to prevent that. We've spoken to lobby groups as well ahead of this summit who are really hoping for a stronger commitment in terms of spending on climate promises. So perhaps that's another big deal that could be done tomorrow.
All right, Laura Makin-Isherwood, we're going to leave the conversation there. Thank you very much for joining us. Of course, Laura Makin-Isherwood just giving us an update on the latest emerging from the G7 summit today. We, of course, continue our coverage as it continues tomorrow.